I just had Harrison Pitt on this podcast talking about Restore Britain's mass deportation plan, and you had some criticisms of that or a critique, and you think there's way too much emphasis on the ECHR because you say it's a political nightmare to actually get out of it. So basically, in that case, given that you do seem to support deportations, how will we actually do it?
Well, looking at the two issues separately, the Restore Britain report comes in two halves, and I actually think it should have been two separate reports. One on the ECHR and the legalities issues, and then one on the practical side of creating the hostile environment. And on the ECHR part, I looked at what they'd produced, and they'd looked at Braverman's report. I think they'd looked at Wolfson's work. And I think to an extent, Peter Lilly, and all of these reports, these are the first three major ones. There will be more to come. And what they all make the same mistake. They've looked at it and gone, because it's legally feasible, and they don't see any legal impediments to doing it, that it won't be politically difficult to accomplish. And I've done the work on this, and I have to work on the assumption that it doesn't matter whether I think or whatever anyone thinks as regards to the Northern Ireland settlement and the GFA and all of that. The fact is, whether or not it breaches the GFA is a contestable opinion. And if it's contestable, you can reasonably assume that it will be contested. So there's a whole heap of lawfare right there. And reading the GFA generously, it doesn't explicitly call for membership of the ECHR as a body, but it does call for what essentially will be another Northern Ireland specific protocol. And then read together with the Windsor framework, you've got a whole mess of backdoors and complications and political diversions where there's going to be lots of pitfalls there in the same domain as Brexit, where everybody assumed we would just submit our Article 50 notice and get on to immediately talking about trade. And very few on the Brexit side, in all of the policy and planning things that had been written, which wasn't very much, none of it anticipated anything like the Northern Ireland Protocol. None of it anticipated something like the Windsor Framework. And if they had, they'd have taken a more sensible approach to Brexit as a whole. But for me, there's alternative approaches here, because one of the things that necessitated Brexit was the Factor Tame case. Quite famously, it established the ECJ as supreme over British law. It could actively overturn British law. Well, there's never been a factor tame with the ECHR. It has never been established as supreme. Parliament is still sovereign in its own house. The ECHR cannot tell governments what to do, and they certainly can't tell MPs what to do. And if you actually look at what people are saying on the continent about the ECHR, they are bumping into the same problems now. There's now 15 signatory states who are saying they support a reform agenda. And I think what we're now in a prime position to be pushing through reforms of it, because we're kicking at an open door. And if we fail to secure reform, then that essentially gives us the moral authority to leave if we want to. But if not, we don't actually need to leave. We can just say the system as it exists was never designed and never intended to stop a country from governing its own borders and deciding who has the right to reside in it. And if the ECHR, as is currently constituted, is preventing a nation state deciding its own asylum policy, then we contend that it is malfunctioning. And we can say we will uphold the ECHR in all of the matters, but on this particular one, until such a time as it is addressed, we're just going to ignore it. Because the ECHR doesn't have any black helicopters, it doesn't have an enforcement squad, it can't fine us. The worst they can do is kick us out of the Council of Europe, which they're not going to do, not least because there is a much more liberal attitude to the ECHR on the continent anyway. So I think a bit of longer term statecraft and just getting on and doing things, because the Tories, to their credit, they finally worked this out a little bit too late, that you can just come out with something like the Safety of Rwanda Act that just says we're going to disapply all this international law, we're going to modify the Human Rights Act, this doesn't apply in terms of asylum appeals, and Rwanda is a safe country. That was never tested in court, but we work off the premise that we are within our rights to ignore the ECHR, and if you've got it down in primary legislation, there is absolutely nothing the Supreme Court can do about it. So I think leaving the ECHR is potentially walking into a whole heap of ambushes that may not necessarily achieve what we want it to achieve. Could end up with protracted negotiations with Brussels about shipments of sausages in Northern Ireland, when we want all of the bandwidth of the next government focused on immigration issues. So that brings us on to the second part of your question, as to how we close down on illegal immigration. Well, this comes to a point. I think I might even have made this point the last time I was on your show, that illegal immigration, the way it has developed, is a symptom of a collapsing administrative state. We have so many coming here, disappearing into the woodwork, and they are able to earn quite a healthy living, because all of our means of local enforcement over the last 30 years has been gradually degraded. And then this collapse accelerated with George Osborne's austerity. We saw numbers of local trading standards officers collapse. We saw the numbers of environmental health officers collapse. The number of inspections collapsed. Then, because we've got statutory obligations to rehome anybody we make homeless if we close down an illegal HMO, the natural consequence of that is councils don't go looking for the things that they should look for. So the job is to rebuild local authority enforcement and to remove all the legal impediments and obligations that disincentivize local authorities from doing the job.